Okay, so I suggest that we continue. Now it's my pleasure to welcome Marco Cavaleri. So Marco is working at the at EMA. He's been working a lot on antimicrobial resistance, but as many of us, he moved to COVID-19, and as many of us, he moved to the field of virology, Marco. But as I said, Marco worked a lot on antimicrobial resistance, and I think we've known each other for more than 2 decades, which shows that I'm getting old, Marco, but it's the way it is. But thank you for accepting the invitation. I know that you are, just as Irene, extremely busy, particularly with all the discussion on the vaccine trials. But nevertheless, you made the time for us, and we're very grateful to that, Marco. And so you proposed to talk about the importance of platform trials in combating infectious diseases. So, Marco.
Thank you so much, Herman, and good afternoon to all of you. Unfortunately, I could not attend this morning because indeed, unfortunately, the activity with COVID are still very hectic. But I will try to give a bit of a perspective from the EMA of what we would like to see and what we may think it's important to consider. So I cannot avoid starting with COVID because, you know, there is a lot of learning associated with that. And still more to come. But just to say that, first of all, the importance of having sufficiently large and well-sized clinical trials in order to determine benefits and risk of medicines. And this is a slide that is summarizing what was the picture in May 2020. And at that point in time, we were really appalled to see the huge amount of fragmentation in clinical research, with a lot of duplication in small trials that were completely inconclusive, and therefore the need for doing better. And I have to say, things after more than a year from then have not really improved as much as we would like to see, but we have seen important progresses. Next slide. And indeed, at that time, we could not avoid, you know, going out publicly as EMA to mention that we were worried about this. The mistaking on the title is, of course, that we were talking about a short window of opportunity. The window, as you know, has become much larger, but still in the context of outbreaks, epidemics, pandemics, there is always a lot of uncertainties around how many patients you can recruit and in which time frame. And this is something that is not going to change. So it's very important to consider setting up platform trials or clinical trials that are large enough to make sure that you can have some buffer with respect to maybe the waning down of the epidemic, or maybe the fact that the epidemic is so massive that clinical trial site, they cannot recruit decently too many patients into any specific study. Next slide. And again, you know, this is the latest one, and you know, it's still amazing that nowadays we have to spend as regulators a lot of time engaging with the public around the evidence on different medicinal products for COVID-19. Ivermectin being one of those that is still heavily discussed, is a kind of a flagship product for the no-vaxxers, as they believe this is the best drug ever. And recently Cochrane came out with this review, and you see here that they concluded that indeed there is not sufficient evidence, which both ourselves and FDA already came to this conclusion a bit earlier. But it's still quite amazing to see 14 studies with almost 1,700 participants. And well, you would have recruited all of them in a single study in the outpatient setting, probably you would have all the answers that you need. But unfortunately, this is not the case. So another example of what can be learned here. Next slide. But then some good news. As you know, dexamethasone turned out to be effective in the treatment of COVID-19, and this was coming from the recovery study, which is one of those studies that look into a broad range of investigator sites handled by academia. So this is not at all a company-sponsored study. And the friends in Oxford were leading this, and they were able to come up with this randomized study with a slight, simple clinical trial approach. So not collecting huge amount of evidence, but a sufficient amount of evidence to come to conclusion. And here regulators were able to come out with the recommendation on the use of dexamethasone because the evidence that we had was clear enough. Next slide. But not always things are simple, and dexamethasone a very nice treatment effect that left no doubt. But for other products, things have become quite complicated, and remdesivir, you know very well, at the beginning, both EMA and FDA acted on the result of this study conducted by the NIH in the United States, which was a well-conducted study, you know, double-blind, randomized, and also FDA inspected some of the sites in this study, so nothing to complain, and the results were positive. And that's why we came up with a conditional market authorization. But then, next slide. Solidarity came up, and not only Solidarity, most recently you've seen also the data from the Discovery study, which is part of the Solidarity network, but also as a lot of differences, and provided recently data. And Solidarity was kind of not confirming the added value of remdesivir, even if I have to say that the endpoints were different. The study design was so different without blinding, and you know, to measure something like time to recover is very difficult to do if you don't have a blinded study. So it was very difficult really to understand what to trust and what we can do in terms of establishing benefits in the context of treatment of COVID-19 for this product. And now also for with the Discovery part coming out with more granular data, and so overall a good study that also is putting in question the result from Act 1. We are still puzzled about what to do and how to interpret the fact that so much different results are coming up from two studies conducted by academic consortia in different parts of the world. So sometimes things are not easy anyway, but it's very important that we work with companies, but also with consortia in order to come up with study design that will be as informative as possible. And since we are talking about Solidarity, that also is an example of a study that is a bit of an all-comer, recruiting patients from all over the globe with very broad inclusion criteria. So the problem here that you have the risk of having some regression to the mean and incorporating such a broad population that then you will not be able really to understand if there is any subpopulation that will be more of benefit. And this is something that also with COVID, we had to reflect on. Next slide. Tocilizumab also is another good example. It's not yet approved, but I can tell you if will be approved by EMA will be because again of the data from the recovery study, not from any of the other studies that are listed here in this meta-analysis, because all the other studies don't have the same power, have more biases, and are much more difficult to interpret. So again, the size of the study and the ability really of measure benefit in a randomized setting on an endpoint such as mortality remain quite essential in order to navigate with all the evidence that we have around the treatment for COVID-19. And REMAP-CAP also investigated tocilizumab, but particularly here for me, it's important to remind you that REMAP-CAP alone would have not been sufficient in order to come up with regulatory decision. And this is an aspect that I believe we need to discuss in the future with all the consortia in order to understand what you can achieve with the different study designs. Next slide. Most recently, you've seen also, these are the data from Recovery, which is about the Regeneron cocktails to neutralizing antibodies against COVID-19. And here to reflect on another important point that you need, first of all, very large study, but also you need to collect some baseline characteristics that could enable you to do subgroup analysis that could be highly informative, like in this case, because here it was possible to define that if there is a benefit in this hospitalized patient population with these antivirals, will be in those that are seronegative at baseline. And then we have to discuss a little bit how seronegativity was assessed in this study. I understood that more than 70 different assays were used. This will not simplify our work as regulators, but maybe it's just the reality of fact in a setting like this. But it's important to think about collecting more baseline data that could be critical in defining subgroup where potentially a benefit might be seen. Next one. This is another study that I'm bringing up from Anakindra. This was done by another consortium, which was an academic consortium, so not at all led by the company. And in this study, they use another biomarker, the super, a bit of an exotic one, but I think the academic group here that was led by Professor Giamarellos in Greece was showing to us that with this biomarker, they were able really to define a population that was more at risk of death. And I think what was nice with this endeavor is that this consortium engaged a lot with the EMA. So we had a lot of interaction and back and forth on the design of the study, and particularly the methodological aspect, which I think is a good example of the way that consortia should engage with regulators in order to be sure that at the end of the day, products can be approved, if of course that is the goal of the study. So in this sense, I think it's a very good example, and this is not yet approved, but is under assessment, and we will see what we can do for this study as well. Next slide. And again, from the EMA, in the context of COVID, we set up this EMA task force, which has been quite instrumental for achieving rapid interaction with developers, discussing clinical trial design, supporting also with the engagement of the clinical trials facilitation group in Europe, the possibility of being faster in coming up with approval across different member states when multi-country studies were done. And I think now this ETF will become part of the European legislation. There is a proposal that might be endorsed pretty soon, in which we'll establish the ETF as part of the EMA response during pandemics and crises. And one aspect would be the possibility of giving rapid scientific advices only via the ETF, and involving also members of the CTFG and of the clinical trial approval groups within the member states. So this really with the hope of being more efficient and being able to carry on clinical research in Europe as a whole faster and in a more efficient way. Next slide. And of course, you know, we are expanding also our portfolio of action with respect to the role of observational studies. But as you know, also with COVID, particularly with therapeutics, we had a lot of issues. And it's very difficult to trust many of the studies that have been brought up as observational studies, which is very sad, but that's what it is. And we will need to think in the future how we can do better into setting up a good framework for observational studies as well, in order to make sure that we can use them as complementary evidence to the randomized trials. Next slide. And indeed, there is quite an important set of activities that are coming up from the European side under the name Darwin EU, which is about improving the ability of conducting data analysis and real-world interrogation. So setting up platforms and networks that could do this, and also from the EMA side to strengthen our ability to assess and interpret real-world evidence as complementary evidence to what we get from the clinical trials. Next slide. Also, along the COVID experience, we have been interacting with a number of platform trials, and the FDA has come up with a guidance on master protocol for COVID-19, which also a lot of its elements will go behind COVID-19, strictly speaking. And then I have to say that we overall agree with what is included in this document. We have not issued a similar one for the time being, and we may not do during this pandemic, but we might reflect in the future if something similar could be helpful. Next slide. And the important points just to mention are, of course, the choice of comparator and the standard of care that is used, which often is an area of big discussion with developers. Very importantly, in the context of platform trial, the analysis based on concurrent randomization. And this can be a tricky area that we will need to discuss, not only in the context of COVID-19, but also behind when we talk about antibacterial agents. The importance of blinding, particularly depending on the endpoint that has been chosen. The entry criteria, we may have to be customizing per investigational agents as needed, and this may create some problems into how then to do comparison and to conduct the trial with several drugs running at the same time. The level of safety data to be collected is an important area, and here I think, depending on the kind of scenario we are in, we may consider whether there could be some alleviation of the type of safety data that we normally require to be seen, but it's pretty clear that for a new biological or chemical entity that has never been approved in humans, it would be important to have a thorough collection of safety data to come up with a good evaluation of the benefit risk. But again, something that we are open to discuss in a pragmatic way with developers and platform trials. The statistical inference, and in particular the interim analysis, being a constant problem with, I would say, all the platform trials with whom we had discussion. The alpha spending in particular can be extremely problematic. The futility analysis or the analysis for determining success even with small data sets is not something straightforward, and that's also an important part. And also stratification is not obvious, and sometimes we are confronted with a bit of an exaggeration in the number of strata that are foreseen. Next slide. Going to emerging health threats and AMR in general, the EMA came up already in 2019 with a regulatory science strategy 2025, which has also been translated into a strategy not only of the EMA but also of the European network in order to be able to advance as much as we can, and according to our role, products that could tackle antimicrobial resistance. And next slide. And indeed, you see here, oh, sorry, the slides got a bit messed up, but you see essentially what is underlined, that the support to clinical trust network in order to facilitate and accelerate clinical development was identified as a critical area. So of course, we are just delighted to see Ecraid kicking off. And we are delighted to see that in Europe, something like that could be set up, because we believe it could have a massive impact. Next slide. And more specifically on antibacterial drug development, which may see a slightly different set of issues and aspects to be discussed, we do see really the importance of setting up this network in order to alleviate the burden of clinical development and to have clinical trials conducted in a much faster pace and potentially being cheaper, so that they can deliver rapidly all the data that we need for regulatory decision. And of course, you know, when you have multiple products, that you could gain efficiency, particularly for the standard non-inferiority clinical trials that we are still asking as a starting point for approving new antibacterial agents. The GCP aspects are extremely important, and this is not only in the context of antibacterial drug development, but overall, including in emergencies, because as a matter of principle, we may inspect all pivotal clinical trials that are conducted by academic groups as needed, but it's important that this aspect is very well covered by the consortia, because I have experienced a few times, but when it happens, it's very sad that important results and news of patients turns out into nothing simply because GCP was not respected. So it's important not to forget about this. And of course, besides the pivotal trials for approval, there are a number of other research questions that can be addressed by this platform trial, would be complementary, would be important, could also be the basis for inform how maybe the pivotal clinical trials for approval could be changed or amended as needed. So that's also an important area that we think for sure something good will be happening in this context. And also talking about specifically antibacterial drug development, the possibility of conducting tailored study to specific pathogens, which could be an added value for certain products, or even something essential based on the characteristic of the antibacterial agent. And last but not least, the role of companion diagnostic, which we expect should be addressed more frequently than what is happening now. Next slide. So this is my last slide. So of course, we do fully support, as stated, the creation of clinical trials network. So the starting of Ecraid is very much welcome, both for treatment of infectious diseases, but also for vaccines. And Oliver described a little bit what Cavaleri is doing. Probably we also need to do more. Randomized clinical trials remain essential for approving new products or for extending the indication of products. So don't forget about this aspect. Real world evidence has a role to play as well, but more complementary than complementary to RCT than else. And for this reason, whenever clinical trials are supposed really to be pivotal for approval, it's important there is a good discussion with the EMA. It's better to talk to the agency once more than having too much discussion with the biostat consultants that maybe are not that helpful. And it's important also to look at the specificity of individual investigational agents. And in this sense, the EMA-ETF will have a precise role in future crises and hopefully also for preparedness activities as per upcoming legislation. But at EMA, we will be very welcome to have also more informal dialogue, because we do understand that sometimes for consortia it's very difficult to go into formal scientific advice. So we are open to discuss with all of you how we can do better in terms of this collaboration. And of course, the international collaboration for us is crucial, but I guess also for network to see opportunity for expanding is important as well. So I will stop here in case there are questions.
Thank you very much, Marco, and also thank you very much for supporting the concept of clinical trial networks. I know that you have been very supportive from the very beginning when we started our discussions on developing and building clinical trial networks. So we're very grateful to you for your support from the very beginning, when people were still skeptical about combining emerging infectious diseases, AMR, etc. You were very, very supportive from the very beginning. So thank you very much for that, Marco. And that it means that once we establish the legal entity, and we need to discuss with you where do you fit in the governance structure, because you need to have a very prominent place in the governance structure of the legal entity. But that's something we can discuss, of course, offline. And we had some discussion, but I think we need to continue with those discussions afterwards. Yeah. Marco, you mentioned the master protocol FDA document. Are there any attempts or initiatives to have a joint collaboration or a joint initiative with FDA on the master protocol, on developing such a joint document?
I think the FDA already came out with this COVID-19 document, so this is already out. But you know, we are discussing very regularly with the FDA, even if I'm losing colleagues every day there. But I think, you know, particularly now that you are kicking off with Ecraid, and for this reason, and maybe with in mind some specific areas, I think we would be very happy to engage with them to see if we could come up with something jointly that could be helpful, you know, for all of you and for the scientific community in general. So definitely something that we will be eager to discuss. The problem, as you know, is that right now it seems that COVID is the only topic that we can talk to them about, or to other regulators, because also we expanded a lot the interaction also with other regulators. But yeah. I really hope that pretty soon we would have sufficient time to come back also to AMR, to antimicrobial, antibacterial drug development, and we can see whether we could maybe draft a joint document that is more general, so not only focus on one specific pathogen.
Okay, great, thanks. Are there any questions for Marco, or any comments? I'm looking at the chat.
Yeah, I see Peter has mentioned that one assay was used. That's good to hear, because I was hearing from other colleagues that apparently there was a multitude of different assays, but if it's one, that's good news.
No, just one, Marco. All done in one lab with controls.
Okay, thanks.
Good. Any questions or comments? No. Okay, Marco. So yeah, thank you very much once again. I know that you're extremely busy, but it was great that you made the time for us to join us. Thank you, Marco.
My pleasure.
And we will be in touch later, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, super. All right, so we're coming to the end. It's been a long day. It's a challenge to be in front of your computer for so many hours, but I think it's been very successful. It's been great. It's been very exciting. And so we go back to COVID-19, and I think what you have noticed today is that we basically achieved our goal, and that was to build an infrastructure where we could run trials on antimicrobial resistance as well as emerging infectious diseases. And you've seen several examples of AMR trials, Reverse and Verdi. You've seen Reverse and Neo IPC. You see you've seen other examples of trials on COVID-19, emerging infectious diseases. And so we will finish with a trial on COVID-19, a platform trial, EU response. And so this is what we would refer to as an affiliated study. Again, we spent a lot of time when we were writing the business plan. We spent a lot of time seeing how the studies could be linked to the Ecraid infrastructure, and therefore we came up with the different criteria. And so the Ecraid affiliated studies are studies where basically they use their own services and infrastructures and branding, and also their own sites, although that could of course change. And if they want to use our own infrastructure, it would be great, and we're very welcome to do so. But that's how we define the affiliated studies. But in those kind of studies, the study director is part of the coordinating committee, and so there is a link that has been established with Ecraid. But of course, we hope that this link will be stronger as this project moves along. So that's just a short introduction to the Ecraid affiliated studies. And so therefore, it's my great pleasure to invite Yazdan Yazdanpanah, who will talk to us about another exciting initiative in the EU Response project. Yazdan.
Thank you, Herman, and thanks a lot for your invitation. So it is a real pleasure to be here. So I'm just talking about EU Response, the European Research and Preparedness Network for Pandemic and Emerging Infectious Diseases. So something that was built around COVID, but it really wants to be a network for emerging infectious diseases in general in Europe. Currently, it is around 21 partners and 16 countries. And we had a grant by European Commission in September 2020 of about 16 million for 5 years. Next slide, please. So here, just you can see countries within Europe and partners within Europe for this network that, of course, it's not static, and it's something that will, I hope, in the future will also improve in terms of centers and in terms of countries. Next slide. Basically, this story started actually unfortunately in March 2020, first with the Discovery trial, which was a phase 3 prospective multi-center adaptive randomized controlled trial of the safety and efficacy of treatment of COVID-19. So we were a daughter trial of SolidAct, as it was mentioned by Marco, with data that were feeding SolidAct. We have almost 8 to 10% of the data of SolidAct, but also with real specificities. And next slide. And just to show you, this was the no overall enrollments until we stopped all the arms. We had some issues to pick up in all the countries, something that we are working on. I will come back to that. Next slide. We had published, so you can just, we stopped based on what appeared, and also based on the DSMB, we saw different arms of the study. Next slide. It is something that it is complementary to what SolidAct did, and I think that Marco said that our results of remdesivir, I think, are important. They will be published tomorrow in Lancet Infectious Diseases. We didn't find, next slide, any significant effect, and you can see also the added value. Previous slide, sorry. The added value was really also the fact that we have more specific data, detailed data, for example, on viral loads, which is one of the specificities of this study. So, as Marco said, unfortunately, this issue of remdesivir is not completely involved, and we're currently with NIH doing an individual meta-analysis to try to respond to some of the questions. Of course, there is the difference. We were not versus placebo, they were. But I think these are things that are extremely important, and to try to respond even afterward through meta-analysis. Next slide. But basically with EU response, after discovery, the idea is to try to move toward more personalized patient care. COVID is not one disease, it's probably multiple diseases. And the idea is really to try maybe to have different medication at different stages of the diseases. So based on that, we built, next slide, the EU SolidAct, which will be the kind of the continuation of discovery that we will move smoothly toward EU SolidAct on the basically almost the same network. SolidAct will be a confirmatory based protocol aiming to document treatment evidence, although we are going also to consider phase 2 test studies. It will be in patient enrolled in hospital, either moderate disease, which will be the part A, or severe disease, which will be the part D. And the primary outcome will be different when you are starting in part A, moderate disease, or in part B, where, for example, the primary outcome will be occurrence of death. That will be a secondary outcome of part A. All this has been actually upfront discussed with EMA. And regarding the countries, we consider that not all countries can actually have the same level of commitments and assessment. So we will have level 1, which is only safety and also efficacy data, but who do not consider as level 2 biobanking or some exploratory add-on protocols. But the idea is to try to be able to do this. And of course, this is first for COVID, but the idea is to move even to other diseases and emerging infectious diseases. Next slide. So this basically shows you WHO stages, so I will pass quickly. Next slide. This shows you the population criteria. And as I said, this is just to emphasize on the fact that there are 2 ways of entering to this protocol through the SolidAct A, moderate disease, or B, severe disease. Next slide. And the outcomes, again, with different outcomes for A, which is progression within 14 days, B, which is death within 60 days. We think this death within 60 days, we think it's extremely important and not 28 days. But of course, then you have some common secondary endpoints. Next slide. So based on this, actually, currently we are finishing in the part A, a discovery trial, which is actually emphasizing on antivirals and MABs, and SolidAct, a trial in part B, emphasizing on the hyperinflammatory stage and so to immunomodulation. Next slide, please. So this is discovery, which is actually the cocktail of 2 MABs, which has been engineered by AstraZeneca with half-life extension technology, which are compared to placebo in patients with hospitalized with COVID-19 in need of oxygen, but in the conventional unit, and only within 9 days after enrollment, with also a proportion of patients being antigen positive. Of course, we are discussion based on recovery trial and whether we should change something. For now, we said no. And so this trial is enrolling currently. The next slide is so the EU SolidAct Part B, which in Part B patients, so more severe patient, is comparing baricitinib and placebo. This also can be impacted by recovery results, and also I think EMA is starting to look at that. So, but it's also, for now it's continuing to enroll, and we are trying to enroll the most possible with more specific data, with biobanking, and then we will see. And then to try to really put this in place over Europe for the future. Next slide. So this is just to say that also through this trial, we are looking and using new regulatory authorization processes by European Commission. So VHP, for example, for oral SolidAct, EU SolidAct B. And so we are really expertising that with some difficulties. And we think that this is extremely important, that we change some rules within Europe regarding regulatory and legal aspects to try to be able to move forward fast. Next slide. So the long-term vision is to really, based on this epidemic, and of course we acknowledge the fact that we were maybe a little bit late on some aspects during this epidemic, but the idea is to have a long-term perspective and a mean-term perspective to try to establish a pan-European preparedness network with an approved master protocol for emerging infectious diseases, with a dialogue with regulators to move hurdles, to integrate really national and central regulatory phases, to fast tracking during pandemic, to a common template for site agreements. It's a huge issue right now. And as Herman, you said during Irene's talk, we think that there is the European Commission, which is important, but there is also a very important role of member states. And we, through the countries, are currently writing to these member states that to tell them that they should be also much more proactive in this, Ministry of Health and Ministry of Research. We are an affiliate trial of Ecraid. We are very happy and proud, and we will play a role as a strong and I hope good partner. Thanks for your comment. I just wanted, I forget this slide. It's just to say that through EU response, we also wanted to make a link with Recover and Remap Cap, because we think that the regulation in Europe, it's extremely important through the trial coordination board. And I think that Herman, you said that, you mentioned that. I think Irene mentioned that TCB is extremely important. And thanks to Jacques Demotte and to John Arne Röttgen, who played an important role of coordination of the TCB. I think that it's important that everyone works together, because probably we have a lot of things to do, and we should be, and we are stronger together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yazdan, and also congratulations with the LID paper. I look forward to reading that paper tomorrow. So really well done. Maybe a question, Yazdan. So if I understand you correctly, you're currently enrolling patients in SolidAct A and SolidAct B. Can you give us perhaps some numbers about the number of countries, hospitals, patients you have enrolled so far, and what is your target number?
So basically, the number of hospitals that should be is around, the sites is about 100. So 80 in Discovery, or which SolidAct A, and 100. But not all the centers are open because of the regularity issues, because of legal issues, the contracts, huge amount of work. Although for SolidAct B, we went through the VHP. So, which means that if one country said yes, the others should say yes. But then we have huge problems to go forward. So there are many countries, so Norway, France, Italy, Spain, Belgium, I think Luxembourg, Portugal are open, but many of them just few days ago since this summer. So that make a huge amount of time, which is really a big issue. And for this, actually, we have written a letter to try to change things. We submitted a paper, I think will be accepted, on all the hurdles in Europe. So the enrollments, there are about 50 to 60 right now. The other issue that we have now, of course, it's that the number of patients are low, which is a very good thing in Europe. So that we can say good. But people who are in hospitals are non-vaccinated people, and non-vaccinated people don't want to be in trials. So that is another issue. So we have issues that not all the centers are open, that the people don't want assist, and a good issue, which is that the epidemic is low. But things are moving.
Okay, great. Thank you for that, Yazdan. Good. Are there any questions for Yazdan or any comments? Looking at the chat. Yazdan, I don't see anything. I don't see any raised hands. Let me wait maybe for a few seconds. No. Okay, well, thank you once again, Yazdan, and good luck with the two trials. So I think we're perfectly on time, 4:15, Mark. So I guess you will close the meeting now. And thank you, everybody, for joining. And I'll leave it now to Mark to close the meeting.
Yes, thank you, Herman. And glad to see that so many participants are still in the meeting. I must admit that I'm extremely proud on the presentations that I've heard today and on what has established so far. And I'm really looking forward for the collaborations that will be continued and that will start. I would like to thank all the speakers and especially Herman for sharing this meeting for the whole day. Thank you, Herman. And I just want to inform all the others that there is something that you must know. Alike van der Velde mentioned in her presentation something that has happened to all of us, that you receive a phone call from Herman. And then the world stops for a few minutes. And after that, you know what to do. And we actually have a term for that. And I did not invent it. It's from someone else, but I'm using it. What happened to you is that you were Hermanized during the phone call. Hermanized, that's the term. So you got the instructions to do the right thing. So Herman, thank you for Hermanizing us through all these years. And thank you for sharing this meeting today. And hopefully, and I trust we will meet each other in real life at the next meeting. Thank you all. Bye-bye.